Welcome to Talent Unfiltered, located at the intersection of innovation and all things talent. Talent Unfiltered is presented by Intalegent and by Hirewerx. Hirewerx, talent forward. Now, here is your host, Ron Gaudier.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talent Unfiltered, presented by Intalegent and by Hirewerx. I am Ron Gaudier, coming to you from Chicago as usual. It is an absolutely beautiful day here in the city. For those of you who are not familiar, Talent Unfiltered is a podcast focused on all things talent, meaning anything that could affect a company's ability to hire gifted, committed, and diverse talent is fair game for our discussions. Our guest today is Nicole Dessain. She is the founder of Talent.Imperative, which is a company focused on helping organizations create amazing employee experiences. And I, for one, am stoked to have her on the show. I expect to learn a lot today, and I hope that you will as well. But before we get rolling, I'd like to invite each of you to visit intalegent.com. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, Intalegent is our digital magazine and online community. It's focused on helping solve the talent equation, and we are blessed to have an absolutely great set of contributors that include thought leaders in the space like Lou Adler, Craig Fisher, Shally Steckrell, Dr. Tanja Coleman, and so many more. We also have a bunch of practitioners who live this experience every day, and they're sharing their thoughts on how to make the act of acquiring talent better for everyone, and that's candidates and companies alike. We offer written content, video content, audio content, and we have some really unique segments called Into, and these are 2-minute digestible pieces of content with actionable tips and strategies that you can use right now. And we believe that we have something for everybody from the C-suite to the street, as we like to say. So come check it out. It's intalegent.com. That's INTALEGENT.com. And once you're there, drop us a line. Let us know what you would like to see on the site. We'll do our very best to accommodate you. Again, that is intalegent.com. Now, this show is available on Spotify, on Buzzsprout, and SoundCloud, and there is a video version, which some of you are watching right now, on YouTube. So if you dig what we do, then like, subscribe, and share on whatever platform you're catching us on. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any new content from us. Okay, let's get to it. Our guest today is Nicole Dessain. She is the founder of Talent.Imperative, which is a company that is focused on helping organizations create amazing employee experiences. And she's also the founder of the HR Hackathon Alliance and is an instructor at Northwestern University in the Master's Program for Learning and Organizational Change. Nicole, welcome into Talent Unfiltered. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No, I think this is great. You and I have passed like ships in the night for a couple of years now, and we got to connect some time back. And I'm really excited to talk to you today because I think so often we confuse employee experience and how that might actually impact talent and recruiting, and I think it's a really critical thing. As I like to say, Amanda in accounting, if she's unhappy, is the worst recruiter you'll ever have because she will literally tell everybody about her experience. And so I want to start by understanding the journey that you took to get where you are today. You started your career at Daimler Financial in the auto industry, and then you worked at Accenture in talent and organizational consulting. You lead talent strategies, you've coached, you've taught, you've founded organizations, including Talent.Imperative, which is your current company, which uses design thinking to create a more people-centric and better employee experience. My question is, what about the employee experience was so intriguing to you that you've devoted a large part of your career to it?
Yeah, thanks for that. And so maybe I'll start by introducing myself in a design thinking way. And we like to do that with our superpower. And so that helps tell the story, I think, a little bit. And then I'll dive into your question. So my superpower is connecting the dots. And I think it started, or I honed that superpower because I'm a liberal arts major. I think that's where it started. And then as you hear from my slight accent, I was not born in the United States. So I've been an immigrant for now 15 years. And so living in different cultures, different languages, I think also helps you, different perspectives, connecting the dots. And then to your point, I am a HR nerd. I've led talent
I don't think you're a
functions.
nerd, though. I
Yeah,
think that's a.
I say that proudly, by the way. So
Okay,
yeah,
okay, that's good.
proudly. I've led talent functions. I was at Accenture Consulting with Fortune 100 companies, and now I'm an entrepreneur in the field. So again, I have sort of a 360 view of the function and connecting the dots there. And then 6 years ago is when I discovered design thinking, and that was on a talent acquisition strategy project. And I was designing a hiring manager workshop, and my client, the CHO, said, this sounds like something similar to what our innovation lab is doing. So I ended up partnering with them, and they used a design thinking method. And I'm not easily taken by trends or new things. Being
Sure.
German, I tend to be more skeptical. But so I was just blown away by the methods focus on empathy and co-creation. And I immediately thought, this is something that we could have more in HR. And so my tagline has become, let's bring the human back to human resources. And, I say that with a lot of empathy because I know why we have not been as human focused traditionally, because we've been focused on policy, process, profits, quite frankly, as a function. But now we have moved overall to an experience economy. Consumer experience, customer experience, and the last frontier is employee experience. And there has been a disconnect. So as a consumer, I expect all these, experiences, but when I come to work, there's a breakdown. I don't have experiences at work, right? So employees are expecting it more and more. And so whenever we talk about user centricity or experience, design thinking is a method and a mindset that can help us explore that. So that's a little bit the story behind. And so to dive a little deeper into the why I love it, or I've always had that, I've always felt that HR, what an awesome job we have, because our function has literally the potential to transform people's work lives into something amazing. And I've always felt like we haven't quite lived up to that potential, but we can, right? And so, that's what's drawing me to employee experience work, because I always say, let's treat our employees as adults. And with that paradigm,
but so often people don't do that. Companies don't do that, right?
I know, and that's what I'm saying. Very often we work in paternalistic cultures, company cultures, and design thinking is breaking that mold, and that's also why I sometimes call it change management 2.0, because it's not us designing things in an ivory tower and then pushing it out and being surprised why nobody adopts it, but it's co-creating with employees and leaders along the way.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating way to approach HR, because I think for so long HR, not so much talent, because I think talent has been kind of misplaced in an organization. In my opinion, it should probably reside under marketing with a dotted line to people, but it's really a sales function. But even in my end of the business on the talent side, we talk about applying, techniques from consumer-driven innovation to be able to understand what candidates are actually looking for, and then to be able to deliver that to them, right? It's a completely different way of looking at it. And so often, and I'm sure you run into this, so often you get pushback because people don't want to think about it that way. People like things to exist in boxes, in very, very familiar boxes. And when you step outside of that, they tend to get a little anxious, I think, is one way to put it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road in employee experience. So I think it's a little bit of a hype right now, and many organizations have sort of bought into the concept of it. But then, so I work with clients a lot on operationalizing it and creating governance around it. And that, to your point, that's where it gets scary, because, let's just think about the onboarding experience, right? If you really map it out from somebody accepts an offer to however you define your onboarding journey, 90 days, some go to 6 months or some go to a year, right? If you look at the entire journey from an employee's perspective, the many touch points that employee crosses a myriad of HR departments, a myriad of business departments, And we are used to operating at it from our department's perspective and checking it, whatever is our role, checking it off the box. But we never have looked at it from the end-to-end employee's perspective. And so then to say, okay, now that we know what the end-to-end experience is, how do we need to collaborate across function, across silos to make it a seamless experience? And that's where it gets a bit scary because, then we get into functions and power structures and role structures and traditional hierarchies. And so, organizations who do that really well have embraced more of an agile mindset and agile ways of working and collaborating cross-functionally.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that we try to talk about at Intalegent, and I had mentioned at the top of the show that you were one of our new contributors at Intalegent, which I'm really excited about, by the way. But one of the things we try to talk about is the idea that you can't silo functions in a business and assume that they have no impact on recruiting or on talent. Your benefits administration has an impact. Your accounting department has an impact. All of these different things go into creating an environment that makes it either easier or harder to recruit. But I want to jump back for just a second. So our topic today is the hybrid employee experience, and I want to define, if we can, exactly what is different about the employee experience now versus prior to 2020. Because the paradigm has changed pretty significantly, and I'd be interested to get your take on what companies should look for in terms of that experience and what obstacles they might run into.
Yeah, and I actually wrote a Medium article about that the other day, so feel free to check that out.
We'll share it, and we'll share the link to it in the thing.
Because I'm getting so many questions about it. And so the way I would define it is it's really a way for us to reimagine where, how, and when work gets done at the very strategic level, right? And at a more tactical level, what it is, pre-pandemic, companies either operated on-premise, right, in person on-premise, or all virtually. Right? So either or. Then during the pandemic, as we know, many companies moved to virtually only. And now we are moving to what's considered hybrid, which is some combination of on-premise and virtual work. And what exactly that looks like, though, should and needs to be customized for each company, based on the roles, where do roles, what work needs to get done, where does it need to get done, and in co-creation with employees, quite frankly. Because what the pandemic has shown us is that work and life are literally merged now, and we can't turn back the clock to say, no, now we are all only work, we're only robots again, and you can't bring your life to work anymore, because guess what? And I'm not going to name any companies, but recently there was a company in the news who it sounds did not include their employees in that decision-making process and or weren't clear in their communications to them, and then the employees wrote a manifesto. And I think we see that more. Employees feel more agency to speak up. They don't want the clock to be turned back. And so, this is maybe a consultant answer, but it really depends how hybrid is defined by organization, and it should be. But in general, this is sort of what we mean by hybrid. It's a combination of on-premise and virtual, both from how the workforce is distributed, as well as how many days people might be in the office, flex work, and all these sort of elements.
Sure. It's interesting that you talked about, you didn't mention the company, although I think I know who you're talking about. But there was an article in the New York Times that said many employees are just saying, well, if I can't work the way I did the last year, I quit. And I think that that's going to be something that we're going to see a lot of as companies really begin to roll back or try to roll back to the way things were pre-pandemic. I think that flexibility is the watchword of most modern benefits programs, right? It isn't just, but today a benefit is less about dollars or 401k and more about, can I fit my life into my job? And I think it's gonna ultimately end up accelerating, skills-based work and the gig economy, and really remote employees being able to have a role in companies. And companies are going to have to figure that out, how that fits into their long-term play. Because I'd love to get your take on this. This is a little off topic from what we had discussed, but certain industries are just not able to be remote. So how would you counsel them about helping employees through this time where they may be apprehensive about going back?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because mostly when we talk about this is about the knowledge workers, and there's, I think, more research done about them and that they would quit and if they can't be, partially remote. But yeah, what about the location dependent? Either industries or parts of the workforce, because one company might have a combination of knowledge workers and location dependent employees, right? So an example that I give in my article is Ford Motor Company, for example. Obviously they have people who work in manufacturing, but then they also have knowledge workers working in their corporate offices. And so their CHRO was on Bloomberg Live and also wrote a LinkedIn article, because they have been working in a hybrid way for a while now and experimented with it. And so from studying what they did take a human-centered approach, is my impression, right? So they did go in it with empathy, and that's a key component of design thinking. Where are your employees at? What are they currently feel? How do they feel? Literally, I know we haven't talked about emotions at work a lot, but we need to, right? So where are they at emotionally? What do they need from the employer? And then co-creating with them what that might look like for that specific workforce, right? Versus a corporate workforce. It sounds like they've done a great job in being able to manage that and really customizing their hybrid approach to the different workforces.
At some point, I want to spend, I know we probably won't have time today, but I want to talk at some point with you about just how scary the idea of co-creating must be for some really monolithic, mature organizations who are not accustomed to thinking in that way. I have to believe that that's just terrifying for them, because they're like, well, what will happen to my business? And you brought up another point, too, because I think that there are some knowledge workers that have location requirements. Lawyers would be an example, right? I happen to work a lot in that industry, and you see some attempts at rapid advancement in things like depositions and things like that to give it the ability to be remote. But even there, I'm hearing in that space, well, we're anxious for people to come back, and I keep saying to my clients, well, that's great, but what's your plan for your attrition? Because it's going to happen. What are you going to do to combat that? And so far, I've heard a lot of crickets. that's been it. So moving on, the journey that team members go on in their tenure at a company affects so many parts of the people aspects of a company. It's recruiting, it's retention, engagement, and most assuredly it touches the company's bottom line. One of the things you talk about, and you've mentioned it a few times today, is using design thinking to drive innovation in the employee experience. And for those companies out there right now that are trying in good faith to shift the way that they engage employees, given all the changes that we've been through in the last 16 months, where would you suggest that they start? What's a good jump-off point for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I get that a lot, because design thinking sounds scary, first of all, or also unfamiliar if you're not a designer. So as a business person, it's like, I'm not a designer, I'm not creative. What is this design thinking? So I use a very simple definition for those who have not heard about it. So design thinking is a method and mindsets for complex problem solving, decision making, and surfacing innovation. So that's usually sort of the one sentence definition I use. And it's really important to notice there's methods associated, but also mindsets, and some of the mindsets are co-creation, our empathy, our creativity, and our experimentation. I actually have my own podcast. It's called Talent.Imperative, and I interview HR leaders who have brought design thinking to their function. And that's usually a question I ask them: how do you get started? And so when I think about the theme from what most of them say is two things. A, don't necessarily call it design thinking, or come in and say, hey, we're going to try this new thing. It's called design thinking. Don't do that. You know, just start, which I always advocate anyway as a consultant, you know, what's the business problem? What's the business pain that you're trying to solve, right? Start by having those conversations and then say, hey, why don't we try approaching it this way? You know, run a little experiment about this, and just sort of almost Trojan horse some parts of the method in. And that's the other step that people say, or the other tip. Start small, right? You don't have to use all the many methods or the end-to-end process that design thinking can be. It can be just maybe doing a little bit of an ideation session, or, you know, interviewing employees, conducting research interviews, or running small experiments, or, right? So integrating them, you know, some parts of the method in current projects, or starting with yourself. The next team meeting you run, maybe do a little, you know, posted ideation session with your team, and then go from there, right? So go small. And then the third thing that I usually recommend is, and that's to your point earlier, that we take cues from the business. And so design thinking actually might be already used in your business if you're in software development or maybe even in marketing. So find those pockets in your organization where either agile, lean, or design thinking is already used for how they operate, and then just say, hey, have you ever thought about using it to design our onboarding program? And usually then they're like, oh, yeah, I know the method works. I hadn't thought about using it at Talent. And so that's an easy sell. So these are sort of the 3 tips that I would give for people to start with design thinking.
You know, I'm really glad that I have an expert in this stuff on today, because people ask me questions all the time. I'm like, yeah, I'm from now on, I'm just going to say, go talk to Nicole, because she's going to have a better idea about this than I am. But one of the common conversations that I do have with my clients tends to center around this hybrid work idea. Depending on the size of the organization, you know, they're asking me from a talent perspective and generally it comes to me from the, hey, we're getting ready to go back to work. We have a lot of hiring that we need to do now that business is going back up. Do you recommend that we work full-time in the office? Should we be remote? Should we have 4-day work weeks? Should we have, you know, a lot of different combinations in order to accommodate people and the way that they may want to work now? So I guess my question for you is, can you explain the challenges that, beyond just the obvious ones that I stated, that this new paradigm, this hybrid paradigm, has created for employers and employees alike? Because I do think there's similar challenges, but they're very different experiences.
Yeah, and sort of it's the flip side to, you know, you mentioned flexibility earlier, and I would say, so there's 3, I guess, levers or components of hybrid, which is flexibility, choice, and inclusiveness. So, and if we think about these 3, there's positives, but there's flip sides from an HR perspective on how there's tensions, right? So one is the employee experience, but then we have to make sure we provide that sort of in a way, right? So that's what I'm seeing. There's a lot of conversations around the tension between employee experience and safety guidelines, for example, right? Or the tension between employee experience and, for example, what we call sometimes location bias, meaning if I'm a manager, I'm in office, I have maybe 3 of my employees are with me in the office and 2 work virtually. What, you know, there's human biases based on if somebody's closer to me than if they're farther away from me, right? And so what does that mean for performance management, for career development, and so forth, right? So those are the challenges that from an HR perspective we need to think through. And then as an employee, similarly, right? So if my manager's in the office and if I'm virtually, how can I make sure that, you know, I'm still top of mind when it comes to performance management and career development discussions, right? So in the article that I wrote, I outlined that there's really 3 roles in this process to make it work, right? So it is HR. So how are we going to reimagine the policies and programs in a hybrid world? And I think they're the architects of that. Then the leaders are the designers of the environment of their teams, first of all themselves, because we see leader burnout these days as well. And if I'm burned out as a leader, I can't take care of my team. So, right, how do you take care of yourself? And then how do you design inclusive environments in a hybrid world for your teams, with your teams. And then the third stakeholder in this is the employee. So what can the employee do to avoid, ensure their own well-being, and ensure they do all the, right things to advance their own career in a hybrid world. So all these three stakeholder groups have different accountabilities and different ways that they need to address it to make it work holistically. And I think the key is to keep co-creating, keep working out loud, and keep experimenting, and and setting that as an expectation. Hey, this is a new paradigm. We are going to throw out the old playbook because it's not going to serve us anymore. So we're in this together, and we will continue to experiment and co-create because things are going to change so fast. So please have patience with us, but we invite you to co-create this with us.
It's so interesting you chose the word holistic, and that's something that, as far as intalegent goes, that's one of the guideposts of what the message we're trying to get across, is that to solve any people problem, it can't be done in silos, as we had talked about before. It is an organization-wide issue, and everybody needs to be on the same page. You also talked about, environments feeling inclusive, and I think that what 2020 did, and I'd love to get your take on this, what 2020 did was it exposed disparities and inequalities in technology among people on certain teams that made work for them much more challenging than it would be for other members of their team who were in places that maybe had good broadband or good internet service. Do you have any thoughts around, as a country or as an org? Let's break it down to maybe that's too big as a country. Let's break it down to an organization. Should organizations help their people who are working remotely set their offices up and do the things that they need to do from a technology perspective to be able to feel included in what they're doing?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And so there's actually also the studies that I cite in the article say that most employers, a year in, have not funded or provided financial support for home office setup. And I think that that's a miss. And I think there will be, it's not, and you can be creative about it. I mean, if you have 500,000 employees, I get it. It can become costly, right? But I think you can be creative about it, and there might be savings and, less real estate or whatever, right? So I think you just need to shift your entire paradigm where you spend money. And this is definitely something that you need to invest in, especially if you're putting a stake in the ground and saying we are going to be hybrid or all virtual. You cannot expect, and you make that a policy or a way of working, then you do need to invest, in home office setup and or co-working spaces or whatever, if you're exploring that, right? And you need to provide that to your employees. And, and we've seen that has caused disparities, to your point, either people did not have the space, and I'm just thinking specifically, Gen Z or millennials, right? Some might even still live with their parents or things like that, right? So we've put people in positions, we had to, right? But now we can be more thoughtful about it. And I do think, and that's also, based on research, that people do expect that. And I think that is a reasonable expectation that companies do support the home office setup financially.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because we're running headlong now towards a much more gig economy style of working, in the way that we approach work. Things will get farmed out pieces at a time, and I think that some companies, especially the more mature ones, and we talked about this a little bit a few minutes ago, struggle with making those changes to eliminate their real estate footprint and to really look at what that saves them, right? If you're a large company, let's say Aon, for example, and you have the whole Aon Center, right? And reducing your footprint there has got to equate out to be some pretty significant cost savings. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And that brings me to my next question. So I want you to put on your futurist hat. We only have a couple of minutes here left. And look out 5 years. Tell me, in your opinion, what is the workforce going to look like? And how should employers prepare now to deal with all the disruption that 2020 was a catalyst for?
Yeah, I think it will be an extension of what is getting kickstarted right now. So flexibility, choice will become, I hope, normal. Right now we're in this transition phase, in this experimentation phase, but I think by 5 years we'll have some successful experiments and some failed experiments that we've learned from. And so I think there will be a period of stability in what hybrid work looks like, or maybe in 5 years it will be all virtual. The vote is still out on that. And then there will also be so this is kind of taken where we are at right now to the next level. And then, of course, there will be a continuation around reskilling and upskilling in truly human skills and competencies as opposed to AI competencies, right? I mean, that train will continue to go in a certain direction, right? So what are uniquely human skills? And those are, by the way, design thinking related skills, so critical thinking, analytical thinking, innovation, empathy are going to remain uniquely human. So how are we going to reshape jobs and roles in the future and define what's going to be human, what's going to be AI? So I think those are, some of the future things we'll see to continue happening.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm actually working on an article right now about that very thing. For intalegent, and it centers around the idea that we need to begin to grab on and relearn some of the analog skills in talent that we had 20 years ago. The ability to have a conversation, the ability to create trusted relationships, and rather than transactionalize it and run with blinders on toward how fast can we hire, there's probably some new metrics and new measurements that we need in order to foster and encourage conversations. Covey says, and one of my favorite books is The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey, and he says point blank in there that business gets done quicker when you trust the person on the other side of the table. And I think that's true of candidates as well. If you have a relationship, if I know a candidate really well, it's very easy for me to pick up the phone and go, hey, I've got this thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any of the, pardon my French, BS that gets in the middle of it. We just get right down to business. And I think as scary as it's going to be for companies, embracing ideas like that and the things that you're talking about are going to be critical to their success going forward. Nicole, where can people read the article that you have been referencing here?
Yeah, it's a Medium article. So I think if you just search for my name, Nicole Dessain, on Medium, you can follow me and you can find the article there.
Okay, and what's a good way for people to connect with you if they have interest in engaging you for work?
Yeah, the best is LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and yet that's just Nicole Dessain, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
At Talent.Imperative.
Correct.
Awesome. Nicole, thank you so much. I really got a lot out of this conversation, and I had a lot of fun learning from you today, and I definitely learned a lot, and I hope that we can do this again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye.
All right. Take care now. All right, that's going to wrap it up for us today. A big thanks to Nicole for taking time to join us here on Talent Unfiltered. I think her approach to the employee experience is one that so many companies could benefit from, especially in this new paradigm we are operating in. Now, if you like what we did here today and you'd like to stay up to date, then like, subscribe, and share on your platform of choice. Don't forget to turn on the notification button so you never miss any new content from us. Until next time, stay safe.